Remove that medal from your uniform immediately." Captain James Thornton stood motionless, his eyes fixed forward. His hands stayed at his sides, his entire posture unwavering, the embodiment of discipline forged in battlefields far from these polished floors. In that instant, the room felt like it had been frozen in time. No one moved. No one dared even to breathe. Where personal conviction stands against institutional authority, where the weight of orders collides with the burden of conscience, where exactly do we draw the line? Today, we unfold the extraordinary story of Captain James Thornton. A story that began not in a courtroom, but in the blistering deserts of Helmand Province years ago, where a simple gold cross, gifted by a dying soldier, became a symbol of something far greater than faith alone. Thornton was no ordinary soldier. Decorated, disciplined, and battle-tested, he had spent years navigating the most complex terrains, not just of war, but of morality. But nothing, not even the worst days under enemy fire, had prepared him for the battle he would face within the walls of this courtroom. It began with a quiet confrontation, a golden cross glinting at his collar, a judge's command sharp as a blade, an officer's calm, immovable refusal. Judge Lawrence Pembroke was a man used to commanding a courtroom like a battlefield general commands his troops. His word was law, his will absolute. But Captain Thornton was not an ordinary defendant. His silence was not defiance for its own sake. It was loyalty, loyalty to a promise made years ago in the dust and blood of war. The judge leaned forward, his voice hardening. "Captain Thornton, you will remove that religious symbol immediately. This court maintains strict neutrality. You are in violation of our decorum." The gallery stirred uneasily. The gold cross caught a shard of sunlight, gleaming briefly like a battle standard raised against overwhelming odds. "With respect, Your Honor," Thornton replied, his voice steady as a river current. "I cannot comply." The judge's face colored with anger. His gavel struck the bench with a crack like a gunshot. "You are approaching contempt of court." But Captain Thornton simply stood, unmoved, just as he had stood once before under enemy fire, refusing to abandon a fallen brother. Hours earlier, in the quiet of his small quarters, Thornton had touched the cross at his neck, the cross once clutched by Private Kendrick, a young soldier he had carried across a battlefield at the cost of his own blood. In that dusty memory, Kendrick had pressed the necklace into Thornton's hand from his hospital bed. "Kept me alive, sir. Maybe it'll do the same for you." 3 days later, Kendrick died. But the cross lived on, not as a token of faith alone, but as a vow Thornton could not break. Now, the court would demand he forsake that vow. And Thornton would respond, not with anger, not with rebellion, but with strategy. Dismissed from court, Thornton retreated not to lick his wounds, but to prepare for battle of a different kind. Behind locked doors, he pulled from his files the documents few knew he possessed, religious accommodations approved by the Ministry of Defense years ago, his Cambridge law degree, his experience as legal counsel to an entire battalion. The judge thought he had summoned a simple soldier to face discipline. In truth, he had summoned a warrior trained not just in arms, but in law, a man who understood the battlefield of words and statutes as keenly as he understood the tactics of war. By the time the courtroom reconvened 3 days later, Captain Thornton was ready. The gallery was packed, word had spread. Soldiers, veterans, civilians, all crowded in to witness what many suspected would be a mere formality. A stubborn guardsman humbled before the bench. Instead, they witnessed a masterclass in dignity and strategic brilliance. Captain Thornton approached the bench not as a soldier to superior, but as an equal, a calm professional presenting evidence, not emotion, as his weapon. "My approved accommodation," he said, handing the judge the first document. Defense Directive 1147, specifying religious symbols are permitted when approved. European court precedent, he continued, stacking document atop document. Civilian courts have no jurisdiction over military uniform regulations. And then, the coup de grace. Your Honor, Thornton said quietly, placing the handwritten summons on the judge's desk. The manner in which I was summoned violates procedural law. This entire proceeding, he paused, locking eyes with Pembroke, is invalid. A stunned silence gripped the room. For the first time, the judge faltered. His authority, once ironclad, now crumbling under the weight of law itself. And in Captain Thornton's unshakable gaze, Pembroke did not see insubordination. He saw integrity, honor, courage. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the judge was forced to recess. He removed his glasses, set them down with trembling hands, and stared not at a defiant guard, but at a man who had just reminded him, and everyone watching, of something the law was meant to protect, not suppress: conscience. Captain James Thornton had fought in deserts under gunfire. Now he had fought in a courtroom under glares and gavels. And both times he had emerged not by overpowering his enemies, but by standing firm in what was right. This was not the end of Captain Thornton's story. It was only the beginning. Because true battles, the ones that matter most, are never about medals or uniforms or even courts. They are fought and won in the quiet chambers of the heart.